Today, we announce the most significant coordinated federal operation in Atlanta's history. What we uncovered was not simple drug trafficking. It was a deliberate penetration of our region's logistics backbone by a foreign criminal enterprise. Those words, delivered at a federal press briefing just 48 hours ago, didn't just signal arrests. They signaled a reckoning that exposed not only cartel distribution networks, but the quiet decay that had been allowed to spread through the seams of power while the city kept moving, kept working, kept trusting. Here are the numbers that shattered every assumption about how secure the South's most important transportation hub really was. 5.1 tons of narcotics seized in a single operational window. 112 arrests across 16 locations. 900 pounds of fentanyl in raw powder and pressed pills, enough to kill every man, woman, and child in Georgia twice over. $58 million in cash, vehicles, and assets frozen before the sun rose twice. And perhaps most disturbing of all, 21 individuals with direct ties to government, public contracting, and law enforcement now sitting in federal custody. This was not a routine drug bust. This was the dismantling of an empire that had been quietly built beneath Atlanta's feet for nearly a decade. An empire run not from a distant hideout, not from some faraway compound, but from warehouse parks, procurement offices, and shipping schedules, right here in the American bloodstream of commerce. If you think you know this story, you don't, because what federal agents found in those pre-dawn raids changed everything we thought we understood about cartel infiltration on American soil. And the next part is worse. 4:06 a.m., South Atlanta. The temperature hovered at 33 degrees, the kind of cold that doesn't bite so much as linger, damp, patient, soaking into concrete. A thin fog hung low over the industrial corridors near the freight yards, swallowing signage and turning streetlights into pale halos. The only sounds were distant tires on the interstate and a lone train horn somewhere out in the dark, dragging its warning across the city like a slow scream. Then came the engines. 14 unmarked tactical vehicles moved in formation through empty streets. No headlights, no sirens, just the low, controlled hum of engines modified for quiet. Above them, 2 helicopters held position miles out, rotors dulled by distance and night wind, hovering like a silent punctuation mark over the city's sleeping spine. Inside the lead vehicle, FBI Special Agent Elena Marlowe looked down at a folder marked with a name that didn't feel real anymore. The task force had been built around it. Careers had been risked for it. Lives had been threatened over it. 10 months. That's how long they'd been building the case. 10 months of surveillance, wiretaps, controlled buys, shipping data, confidential informants who kept checking over their shoulders like they could feel death approaching from behind. Tonight, it all collapsed into a single window, 40 minutes. At 4:11 a.m., the command came through encrypted channels. One word: execute. What happened next would later be described by federal officials as the most precisely coordinated multi-agency strike Atlanta had ever seen. FBI tactical units hit 3 targets simultaneously across the south side. DEA teams breached 2 suspected conversion labs tucked into industrial properties near freight corridors. ICE agents descended on a network of safe houses spanning multiple counties, properties tied to trafficking routes hidden behind room-for-rent listings and fake staffing agencies. And a joint SWAT task force moved on what intelligence had identified as the operational headquarters, a sprawling distribution facility disguised as a cold storage seafood importer. The kind of place you'd drive past 100 times and never remember. The first breach came at a 2-story building with peeling paint and a cheap security camera angled too high to actually help anyone. The door lasted 1.2 seconds against the ram. Flashbangs lit the hallway like lightning in a coffin. Federal agents in black gear flowed through the structure fast and controlled, each movement practiced until it didn't feel like movement at all. Inside, they found exactly what the intelligence promised. And then, they found something worse. The main floor held 19 suspects, some half asleep, some reaching for phones, some frozen, like their bodies hadn't caught up with the moment. Plastic-wrapped bundles of cash lined the walls. Forged documents covered a central table: passports, IDs, work permits, each stamped, laminated, and perfected. Paperwork designed to manufacture a new identity the same way the network manufactured poison. But it was the back room that stopped agents cold. Behind a false panel hidden inside a maintenance closet was a compact pharmaceutical setup: stainless tables, industrial mixers, ventilation units, precision scales, and bins, dozens of them, filled with pressed pills, uniform and clean, stamped with markings designed to mimic legitimate prescription medication. The kind of detail that doesn't come from street-level criminals, the kind of detail that comes from professionals. A DEA chemist on site would later testify that the equipment could produce over 2.5 million pills per month. 2.5 million. Not across a border, not in a faraway lab, in a back room in Atlanta. Agents seized 2.1 million counterfeit pills from that location alone. Across the metro area, the other strikes produced similar results. At a warehouse near a trucking corridor, DEA teams found a fentanyl conversion line hidden behind stacked pallets of imported tile. The facility manager, a man in a clean suit with no criminal record, was caught trying to smash 2 encrypted phones with a hammer when agents breached the door. In a suburban apartment complex, ICE units raided connected units that had been turned into a trafficking pipeline. 29 individuals were rescued, some dehydrated, some sick, some barely speaking, kept in cramped rooms, moved like inventory, promised opportunity, and delivered captivity. But the most significant discovery came at the cold storage facility, because it wasn't seafood. At 4:19 a.m., the Joint Task Force breached the loading bay doors and met resistance. Not panicked resistance, not sloppy resistance, professional resistance. Men with rifles behind stacked crates opened fire in controlled bursts. The firefight lasted 3 minutes and 47 seconds. 2 suspects were killed, 5 were wounded, 11 were taken into custody. 1 federal agent was shot in the leg, non-fatal, and dragged behind cover while the team kept moving, inch by inch, because the job doesn't stop for blood. When the smoke cleared, agents stood inside something that didn't feel like a warehouse. It felt like a fortress. They found 2.9 tons of cocaine, shrink-wrapped and barcoded, 600 pounds of heroin sealed in bricks, 400 kilograms of methamphetamine separated into distribution lots, and enough fentanyl, raw powder and pre-pressed product to qualify as a mass casualty event if it ever hit the wrong hands. But that wasn't what made investigators go pale. In a sealed office, climate-controlled, reinforced, behind a steel door that required cutting tools to open, they found a server rack, then another, then another. A server farm, industrial grade, quietly humming in the dark like a heartbeat. And on those drives, data that would take analysts days to decode. What they found changed everything. 9:32 a.m., FBI Atlanta Field Office, Cyber Forensics Lab. Fluorescent lights washed the room in sterile white. 17 analysts worked in shifts, eyes red, hands steady, surrounded by equipment designed to peel secrets out of machines that don't want to speak. The encryption was military grade, not typical criminal password protection. This was the kind of architecture you'd expect guarding state secrets. That alone told investigators one thing: this wasn't just trafficking. This was governance. By mid-morning, the first files cracked, and what spilled out didn't look like a cartel ledger. It looked like a blueprint. The operation had a name: Project Red Switch. According to the recovered documents, Project Red Switch wasn't simply a narcotics distribution network. It was a comprehensive infiltration strategy designed to establish permanent operational control over the southeastern logistics corridor. Atlanta wasn't just a city in the plan. Atlanta was the engine. Its architect was referenced in communications only as el tenedor, the holder. The files showed financial pipelines spanning continents, shell companies registered across multiple U.S. states, ghost firms tied to offshore jurisdictions, fake nonprofits claiming to provide community support while laundering cash through grants and consulting contracts. A chain of small logistics vendors, companies no one thinks about, had processed millions in billing without ever moving legitimate cargo. Money flowed through the network like blood. It entered as drug revenue, was cleaned through layers of crypto transactions, then returned to the United States as business investments, real estate purchases, and something more chilling than campaign donations: procurement leverage. That's when investigators realized they were no longer dealing with a drug case. They were dealing with infrastructure capture. The decoded files contained records of payments made to people who shouldn't have been for sale: public contracting intermediaries, permit expediters, union-connected fixers, a customs-linked consultant, and multiple individuals tied to enforcement who had provided scheduling data, patrol routing, and advance warnings. Then, analysts found a folder labeled Author/Regional. Inside was a name that made the room go quiet: Deputy Operations Director, State Logistics Oversight. Authorization confirmed. The individual was later identified as Malcolm Rayner, a high-level state logistics oversight official whose influence touched procurement channels and transportation auditing across multiple counties. According to the files, Rayner had helped shape which companies won certain contracts, which warehouses were inspected, which trucks were pulled for random checks, and which routes stayed open and clean. He didn't wear a cartel tattoo. He wore a badge at conferences. He shook hands. He saw Federal Tactical Command Center, undisclosed suburb. The room wasn't loud, but it was alive. 200 personnel, every major federal agency represented. Maps, screens, call signs, red markers pulsing across the region like a living infection. On the central display wall, a logistics map of the Southeast glowed. Interstates, rail lines, freight terminals, shipping lanes. 49 locations, connected by threads only the server files had revealed. The operational commander addressed the room with the gravity the moment demanded. "What we execute in the next 12 hours will determine whether we dismantle this organization or merely teach it how to hide better." He paused. "We have one chance." The resources assembled were staggering. 900 federal agents from field offices across 5 states, 50 tactical vehicles, 13 helicopters configured for rapid insertion, maritime units staged near port corridors, surveillance support coordinated through state-level emergency frameworks, because the implications now smelled like national security. At 5:51 a.m., the order went out: execute all targets. Operation South Point Cleanse is a go. What followed was 6 hours of controlled chaos that reshaped how law enforcement understood cartel ambition. FBI agents arrested a financial strategist who had managed cartel-connected investments while presenting himself as a clean-cut advisor to high-net-worth clients. His office wall held framed motivational quotes. His safe held burner phones and vacuum-sealed cash bundles. At a trucking yard, ICE and DHS units seized vehicles with compartments welded so cleanly they looked factory-made. Manifests showed produce, construction material, paper goods. The compartments told the truth. And in a quiet subdivision with manicured lawns and blinking porch lights, federal agents moved on Malcolm Rayner. He was intercepted as he attempted to leave in a private SUV. Inside were 2 suitcases of cash, 3 encrypted devices, and a folder containing travel documents that suggested he didn't plan to come back soon. Rayner was taken into custody without resistance. According to agents present, he said only one thing during his arrest: "You have no idea how deep this goes." By noon, the results exceeded projections. 74 additional arrests, 2.4 more tons seized beyond the initial 5.1, $26 million recovered, and digital evidence enough to keep federal prosecutors occupied for years. But the most significant discoveries came from the arrests inside law enforcement. The betrayal of the badge cuts deeper than any bullet. That statement, made during debrief by a veteran officer, captured the wave of nausea that moved through honest law enforcement as the scope of infiltration became clear. The recovered communications revealed a methodical approach, not random bribery, recruitment. They identified officers with debt, family vulnerabilities, addiction, career frustration, ambition. They approached carefully, small favors, small payments, then bigger ones, then a point of no return. Some provided advance warning about roadblocks, others adjusted patrol routes. Some lost evidence. A few actively assisted the movement of shipments, using uniforms as shields. Investigators identified 27 compromised personnel across agencies: city officers, county deputies, a state trooper tied to commercial inspections, and one senior figure who had overseen interdiction strategy, paid monthly to ensure certain corridors stayed clean. The revelation didn't just shatter morale, it poisoned trust. One officer reportedly broke down during an interview. "I trusted him," he said. "We all did. He was the one telling us where the danger was." He swallowed, and the whole time, he was the danger. The corruption extended beyond policing. Contracting officials who steered bids, local figures who pressured inspectors, intermediaries who turned procurement into a laundering machine. What emerged was a parallel power structure, a shadow system designed to protect the network and ensure its survival. As one analyst summarized during briefing, they weren't just corrupting the system, they were becoming the system. And then the map got bigger. The command center display didn't just show raid locations, it showed connections, lines stretching outward like veins. Nashville, Charlotte, Jacksonville, Birmingham, New Orleans. Project Red Switch was never meant to end in Georgia. The decoded strategy files revealed why the Southeast had been chosen. It was underestimated. For years, enforcement focus leaned heavy toward borders and coasts. But the Southeast had what criminals dream of: interstates that connect everything. Rail freight arteries, ports and cargo facilities, massive warehousing, millions of packages moving too fast to inspect. The plan called for turning Atlanta into a distribution command hub. From there, product would flow outward along trucking lanes and rail routes, hidden inside legitimate commerce. They didn't need to invade, they just needed to purchase influence. The projected annual revenues, once fully operational, were estimated in internal files at over $2.7 billion. They had recruited local crews as junior partners. They had established community-facing fronts to normalize their presence. They had drafted playbooks for political influence, how to seed donations, how to target vulnerable officials, how to turn help into leverage. One recovered document contained a line so cold it read like a philosophy. American systems do not break under force. They bend under incentives. Find the incentives. Control the bend. This wasn't an invasion. This was colonization through paperwork. But the raids disrupted the timeline. The arrests removed key nodes. The seizures erased years of investment. The exposure made continuation impossible, at least for now. Federal officials estimated the operation set the network back 4 to 6 years. But nobody believed it was over. Because organizations like this don't retire. They adapt. The human cost of this story can't be measured in tons seized or millions frozen. It must be measured in the teenager who takes a pill at a party, thinking it's a prescription, and never wakes up because it was poison pressed in a back room behind a fake business sign. It must be measured in the worker who crossed borders chasing a job and ended up locked behind a door, treated like inventory, sold between addresses. It must be measured in neighborhoods where trust collapses because people learn the hard way that sometimes the uniform doesn't mean safety. It must be measured in citizens who discover the people they trusted with authority sold pieces of their city for favors and silence. Power does not always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it arrives quietly through bank transfers, procurement deals, whispered agreements. Sometimes it wears a suit instead of a mask. Sometimes the enemy carries a briefcase instead of a weapon. That is what makes infiltration so dangerous.
And that is why exposing it matters. If you're still watching, hit the like button so more people see this story.
The individuals arrested in these operations will face federal prosecution. The evidence recovered will fuel investigations for years. The networks disrupted will struggle to rebuild. But this story is not over. It never is. Because the organizations behind these operations have vast resources, infinite patience, and ambition that stretches into every city where there are customers for their poison. What happened in Atlanta was a warning, a glimpse of what happens when vigilance fades and corruption takes root. A demonstration of how quickly criminal enterprise can penetrate, and freedom demands attention, constant attention, to who holds authority and how they use it. Comment "switch" if you want stories like this brought into the light. Share this with someone who needs to understand what can happen beneath the surface of everyday American life. And remember, this story is fictional, a dramatization inspired by real issues facing American communities. The names of officials are invented, the specific events are imagined, but the threat they represent is very, very real. As dawn rises over Atlanta today, the city continues to move. Trucks rolling, trains humming, workers clocking in. Most people unaware of how close a hidden empire came to turning their infrastructure into a criminal supply chain. Somewhere, a mother is telling her children that the bad people who poisoned their neighborhood are gone now. Somewhere, a young officer is recommitting to the oath she took, despite what she learned about colleagues who betrayed it. Somewhere, federal agents are already tracking the next network, following the next trail of money, preparing for the next operation. Because this fight does not end, it simply moves to the next battlefield. And as long as there are those willing to defend American communities against those who would exploit them, there is hope. The shield of justice does not break. It bends, it strains, sometimes it cracks, but it holds. It always holds.